And I said to my co-founder, look, I'll do my very best, but I'm going to need you to lead the call because Zara's going to be in the room with me. And I will never forget what he said, which is, if they are the sort of clients that mind that you've got a toddler on the call, I don't want them as a client. We all learned through the pandemic that people have lives beyond their professional persona and image. And that's true, right? Cats walking across the screen, babies coming in on calls, all this kind of stuff. There are times where it's obviously not appropriate, but the rest of the time, it's an absolute delight when someone's kids come in.
Mm.
And I think if you're the kind of person that minds that, I don't know, are you really the kind of person I want to make rich, famous, and successful through working with you? I don't know, maybe not. And so we get to choose a little bit.
Welcome to the Focus and Chill podcast, where we discuss unconventional productivity tactics designed for neurospicy people. I interview neurodivergent guests who figured out secrets for getting a ton of amazing work done without burning out. I'm your host, Jeremy Nagel. I'm an ADHD software developer turned startup founder and PhD candidate. I built FocusBear to help with my own productivity and burnout challenges. Welcome to episode 126 of the Focus and Chill podcast. I'm thrilled to be joined by James Stewart today. James is a UK chartered mechanical engineer, holds an MBA from INSEAD, an MEng and an MA engineering from the University of Cambridge. He's an active angel investor in 2 Australian VC funds, an advisor to several tech startup companies, and part-time venture partner for a global VC fund. James held senior roles in scale-up tech companies and corporate innovation teams, and was a strategy consultant at BCG, Boston Consulting Group. He's now the CEO of Always Carbon. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Yeah, likewise. Now, to kick things off, could you tell us about your experience with neurodivergence? When did you realize that you weren't neurotypical?
So I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was about 6 years old, so fairly early actually, and started attending a specialist dyslexia unit during primary school. And so really dyslexia has been part of my life the whole way through, but it has, my attitude to it and my understanding of it has considerably shifted and improved, I think, in the last few years, which I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about in this podcast. But yes, it's always been part of my life. It's been part of my educational experience, it's been part of my professional experience, and I'm very happy that it is starting to form more of my professional work as well, which is great.
Yeah, keen to hear about the professional work side of it very soon, but keen to hear about, I guess, the experience growing up with dyslexia, because I imagine at that time it may not have been a particularly empowering experience.
No. I think it's like everything, that the more you know about yourself and the more you understand your brain and your neurodiverse status, I think the better choices you can make about which aspects you want to lean into, how to manage some of the challenges that can present. I was very, very lucky. My mum and dad were incredibly kind and hardworking teachers. And so they knew something was up. And I actually talked to my mum and dad about this. How did they realize? How early did they realize? Because we now have a little girl. And so I'm very aware of at what point should I be looking for the clues and sending her off for a diagnosis and trying to help her with the right sort of strategies and things. And they tell me that it really was around the first year or two of school. And the thing that really saved me was my love of swimming. And the reason I say that is that apparently I was being, and I quote, quite naughty in school and not paying attention and not doing very well in class. And it was clear that I was intelligent. And the teacher was interpreting that as being a bad kid. And was starting to say, well, if James doesn't finish his work, he can't go to swimming with the rest of the kids. And my mum, who knew absolutely how much I love swimming, I still love swimming. I love getting in the water. I always have. And mum realized something was up. And that was bad. And I was starting to not like school as a result. And they could see that my reading ability was pretty much non-existent at that point, and my writing was pretty bad, and the classic clues of dyslexia. And they sent me off to get assessed. And sure enough, I was indeed dyslexic. And so that kicked off as a kid. I remember working quite hard in the school holidays. Mum and dad were very kind, working with me on phonics and reading. And there were a couple of things that I think made a really big difference. And I'm very lucky and grateful to them that they did what they did. So they did send me to a school that had a dyslexia unit. So I don't remember reading really anything until I was sort of at least 9, if not 10 years old, which is pretty rare, right? Kids pick up books. I had a few, but I couldn't get through the material, and I wasn't very interested in them as a result. So the dyslexia unit really helped me considerably because they actually taught me in the way that I could understand. And they had age-appropriate stories written in language ability or reading ability appropriate language. And I remember The Adventures of Jeff and the Space Patrol, because I'm that kind of nerdy sci-fi kid, still am. I remember blitzing through those, and I blitzed through them incredibly fast, and my reading ability came up very fast. And it was a lot of work in the school holidays, a lot of flashcards from mum and dad, them being very patient with me. Some edible bribes for doing the right thing, I think, helped. I remember dad getting a massive box or two of very old comic books that someone was throwing away. And the fact that that had the pictures and the words and the stories were appropriate and engaging for that little boy, lots of adventure and excitement and battles and the usual kind of stuff. And that's really how it all turned around. And I ended up passing what was called the 11 plus in the UK, which is the end of primary school exam. Went to a selective grammar school. The second sort of lucky break, I think, was we changed cities. So we moved across the UK. Dad got a different job. And we moved when I was about just coming into the high school exams, the GCSEs as they were called back then, and changed schools. And that gave me a bit of a reset button on expectations, much more academic school. The subjects I took changed as a result. So I took more of the sciences, and I took more of the more sort of academic subjects as opposed to the things I've been doing at the other one. And they were very, very focused as a school at sending people to Oxford and Cambridge. And I, by that point, had decided I wanted to do things in engineering because I loved science and I wanted to help people do things, and not just be a researcher. And so I signed up for the extra prep classes for Oxford and Cambridge simply to get extra prep to get into university at all. I think the story is that I got an offer from Cambridge. I put it as my first offer. They offered me a lot more higher grade points than I was expecting to get, and I didn't care because my secondary safety backup offer was a really fantastic university I was very happy to go to. But to be a chartered engineer at the UK at the time, you had to have the same score as that backup university was offering me. And so it didn't really matter what I put as my first choice in my mind's eye. And then, of course, I got much higher grades than I was expecting. I learned to study in a way that worked better for me. And I ended up having to take a year out to kind of get my head wrapped around the fact I was going to go to Cambridge and do engineering now, after all. I will say that Cambridge in the 2000s was not the most neurodiverse-friendly environment. It has apparently improved considerably. That may surprise people, it may not. Yeah, the UK at the time, when I was growing up in the 80s, I think we were in a huge debt to the people that were role models and were willing to talk about being dyslexic, willing to talk about being neurodiverse. And that's the one that really comes to mind is Richard Branson, who I think literally inspired an entire generation, because my mum and dad would clip me articles and talking about him and what he'd done as an entrepreneur, actually. And at the time, I never saw myself becoming an entrepreneur. I never saw myself founding companies. I never saw myself doing that kind of thing. And that's come much later in life. But the fact that there was no sense at any point that I should give up or quit. And that has been very, very important because it can be very confronting if you're in a neurotypical optimized system and you're someone who really is quite different. It can be very hard. So I take my luck, and I'm incredibly grateful for the luck that I've had. And I've tried to take lessons from some of the challenges and turn those into attributes and strengths that I think help me now. And so that's an ongoing process. I don't think you're ever really done with that because the environment changes and the tasks change. The only thing I will add is that along the way, the psychs have pointed out ADHD as probably being part of my makeup, and I have yet to go and get a formal diagnosis of that, despite the clues that are there. But I am actually reading up on it more and understanding it more from friends who are diagnosed ADHD and using some of the techniques that they take on. And I'm finding that quite helpful. And I think the other thing just to point out is how grateful I am for having really supportive neurotypical friends and family members around me who have helped me enormously throughout. And it is a case of everybody plays their strengths and we team up on things. But, my family have been very kind in helping me plan and organize things, which I find quite hard, or especially as a kid I used to. And my wife still puts up with my quirky need to put everything onto my diary, because if it's not on the diary, I'm probably not going to show up or I'm going to forget. And hats off to you, Jeremy, because you put this recording on my diary, and therefore here I am, really excited to be on the podcast. So it's been an adventure and a journey. I don't think we're ever done, but the the lessons I've learned along the way have been invaluable. I do think truly dyslexic thinking and neurodiverse thinkers bring enormous insights and difference and variation in solutions. And I have seen it repeatedly in my career so many times that I just look at problems very differently, come up with different answers, and do not accept the status quo as defined and set in stone the way that others do. And I think that can bring conflict and challenge, or it can bring success and results. And so I think society is moving more in the direction of realizing that neurodiverse brains are a huge asset in problem solving, huge assets in research, huge assets in marketing and business. And that we're working as a society, I think, to find ways to accommodate them. And as we bring more and more software in to do the things that neurodiverse people often find very difficult, well, then hopefully things will move in a better direction and we can add more to society. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
How's that for opening thoughts?
Yeah, no, that covers off all the points I wanted to ask about there. And that last part about the advantages of the dyslexic and ADHD brain, that's something that a previous guest had mentioned. They said that NASA is now trying to hire dyslexic scientists because they find that they're better at visual thinking. Do you think there's something to that in terms of engineering?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Without any question in my mind's eye, I meet so many, or in my life, I have met so many dyslexic engineers. I've met so many neurodiverse people doing engineering technical subjects. I've also met them doing creative and art subjects too. There really is no solid pattern, but I will say that spatial reasoning, thinking things through in 3Ds, thinking about things in graphs and process diagrams, things like, I'm a much more visual thinker than some of my favorite neurotypical people who like to write long lists and write it down and have long documents. I would much rather have a mind map or a diagram than a long heap of text. And one of my favorite tricks has been, when I've had to study up on something, is to plug into my favorite search engine, which I won't name, but to plug into my favorite search engine, visual summary of book. And to get a visual summary, which is usually means that someone who's studied it has done a mind map. And I look at the mind maps and I always go through the first couple of mind maps. And then once I've got the key ideas locked in my head and the structure of how it would work, then I go back to sort of picking out chapters and things. But yeah, so much of the stuff that I've been asked to read in my life and study up on is just waffle. It's long-winded, padding words for people who need that structure. And I need the content. I like it nicely structured. And I have a lot of respect for people who can write like that. But it just shrinks the duration and volume. And so yeah, I think neurodiversity is a huge plus, and there's some schools of thought that think that it's a major feature of human society and human evolution to have neurodiverse brains in the population. I absolutely agree, because if you think about how we progressed as a society through thousands of years, it's often driven by people taking a different approach, striking out to a new piece of territory, striking out for a new way of doing something, and shaking up the status quo. And that makes us a threat and a challenge to people who want the status quo to persist, which means, of course, that we get tagged with some negative labels. But on the other hand, that is how things move forward. And people who want outcome and results tend to not be so fussy. So I try to make sure that I'm an ally to progress and an ally to people who are trying to do new and different things, because we need it as a society. Things change. Our environment is just changing. Our technology is changing. Our needs and our perceptions of what is acceptable is changing. And so we need to reconsider and rethink the way we do things on an ongoing, continuous basis. That is neurotypical optimization for status quo and neurodiverse out there zany approaches to help generate options and alternatives that we perhaps wouldn't have thought of before. So there's one more thing that I will just add, Jeremy, which is I find it incredibly normal and typical to look at what is done in one field and pull it into another field and consider whether that approach and that even mindset or management system or technology or anything like that, that is second nature to me. I've done it so many times in so many places. Is if you were to approach this the way that they approach it in music, what would that look like? Or if I was to approach this the way that a biologist would approach it as opposed to an engineer, what would that look like? Constraint thinking, if I could take the cost of this down to zero somehow, or if I could take the energy required to do this up to infinity, what would that look like for my solution? What would that look like for the optimization of this problem? That is very, very second nature. And for some of the folks I've met, that's really odd, really unusual, and they don't find that normal. So yeah, I love this stuff. And I'm very grateful to, if the folks want to call me neurotypical or neurodiverse or not, that's up to them. But it's the way my brain works, and I really love it. and I want to do more with it, basically.
Absolutely. Now, talking about pushing the status quo, can you tell us about Always Carbon and the other work projects you're working on?
Sure. So I'm very excited to be the co-founder of Always Carbon, and we are a decarbonisation company. Basically, we were set up to try and maximise the tons of carbon dioxide that we remove from the air. We try to also these days help people to avoid putting carbon there in the first place if we possibly can. We really have strong expertise in what is called biochar, and biochar is a form of charcoal. What it really boils down to is plants suck in CO2 when they grow and they turn it into their plant tissues. And if we do nothing, or if we eat the plants or burn the plants or let them rot in the field, that carbon that their plants embody will turn back into CO2, or it will turn worse into methane, and it will go up and contribute to global warming. On the other hand, if we can get hold of that plant material when the plants have been processed for food, so things like nutshells or sawdust, that kind of stuff that's left over, that's often a waste cost to the food processor and to the agribusiness. And so we try and intercept that material and turn it into charcoal, which means we use big off-the-shelf ovens, which are usually used for charcoal briquette making. We just don't buy the briquetting line. And we produce this material called biochar. And if you produce it correctly to the right chemical formula, you basically have a stable form of carbon that can persist for certainly hundreds of years, but really, truly, the research suggests it's tens of thousands, if not 500,000. And so we basically are regenerating coal reserves, in effect. We're putting them back. The other twist in the story is that the biochar that we make is almost always useful. And it's particularly useful and impactful in agriculture. So it is actually a soil improver. You can go and buy it at the garden centre to improve how your plants grow. And so the idea really is that, yes, we operate in the global voluntary engineered carbon removal markets. So we issue carbon credits to help pay for all of this stuff. But if you've paid for a ton of carbon removal, we can actually ship you your ton of carbon if you so choose. We would ask you very nicely to please don't burn it, put it on your garden or put it in your fields. But the agricultural boost that the biochar can bring is enormous. It's a fantastic material. Structures the soil, helps with the soil microbiome, helps with water retention, helps fertilizer be more effective. And we're very, very proud to be doing some work with some very famous global institutions that you would know. And we're very careful about confidentiality, so I can't name them, but watch this space and the reports will come out about literally how does this material help agriculture. And how does it boost outputs? And the answer is it's huge. So yes, there's a carbon removal effect, and that is absolutely important. That's what we're founded to focus on. But there's also an agricultural feeding the world boost and actually getting more output from the same amounts of input and the same amount of land, which is incredibly important, and making the crops drought resistant and drought tolerant. So the key is you want a nice, stable, high volume, consistent supply of this material called biochar, and then mixing it in with fertilizer makes it more effective. And then we've got other things that we would do with it, for instance, mixing it into concrete, which makes it stronger. So you can have carbon enhanced concrete, you can have carbon enhanced plastic, and you can do that with biochar because it's basically such a cheap material to make. It's the cousin to activated charcoal. So that's that company. That's my primary activity. It has led us into conversations and projects with mining companies, agricultural companies, food producers, landfills, you name it. Anything and everyone who is trying to cut the amount of CO2 in the air, we want to try and find a way to work with and help. And so it's just been enormously rewarding and interesting.
Any water utilities yet for dealing with?
Trying. We'll certainly help them. There's things we can do. The water companies are very good. The previous deep tech scale up that I was the CMO for, we worked a lot with the water industry. And simultaneously, one of the most important and impactful things that we have in our entire life, without water, cities cease to exist and we cannot survive. So they literally do life-sustaining work on a day-to-day basis. I take my hat off to them. I think like so many large organizations, there's a balance between innovation and moving things forward and changing what we do with keeping the lights on, keeping the water running, keeping the power flowing, and making sure that's done in an extremely robust and safe way. And those big organizations can be very tricky to get them to kind of embrace new things. That said, there are some very innovative people at the water companies. I've met some of them. And the place that water companies in particular are investigating our topic, which is biochar, is specifically around something called biosolids. So when at the end of sewage treatment, there's material that in Australia, at least, you used to be able to put into landfill, and you kind of can't do anything more with it. It's sort of solid residue. called biosolids. And there is work to stabilize that by charring it, turning it into a form of charcoal, drying it, turning it into a form of charcoal. And then that as a stable form of charcoal, embodying all that carbon, but also things like heavy metals and gold and lead and things, but it's stabilized in the charcoal, so it's safe and it's benign, and that can then go to landfill. So they're investigating that, and then various different water bodies around the world are investigating biochar as a low-cost water filtration medium, because it's the cheap, slightly less effective cousin to activated charcoal, but it just means you can just use so much more of it. And so you can filter drinking water supplies, and there is evidence from the academic literature around filtering out PFAS and what are called forever chemicals, but PFAS filtration and microplastic filtration. And then you've got a biochar that you wouldn't use for agriculture, but that biochar can be safely put into landfill, or it can be thermally treated to destroy those plastics and the PFAS, so it basically can be incinerated and burnt. And so it's an interesting mindset shift. This is what I mean about taking an approach that's been very well studied and established in agriculture, which is biochar as a soil improver. We use it to boost crop yields, and taking it to the industrial end, which is it's an industrial input that has fantastic properties that lets us do all sorts of things like water filtration at scale that we wouldn't necessarily be able to do if we're using this fantastically expensive but beautifully engineered material called activated charcoal. So yeah, it's a long way of saying, give me a call, water companies, because there's more we can do for you folks. But this is what I mean.
I asked that, just as an aside, I asked that because my wife is an energy officer at a water utility, and as we were talking about biochar, she came and stuck her head out.
Did she? Oh, well, we'll have to introduce this. We'll have a chat. I'll be slightly less chatty than normal. Like I said, I think the water companies, they are probably the most interesting thing that I have not yet worked in my career. And I've said to my co-founder that once we've solved climate change and taken all the CO2 out of the atmosphere that we want to, which, we've got a little bit of work ahead of us, and that the next one I want to go after is drinking water supply and water treatment, the next two, because they're so crucial for life. And anyone listening to this podcast, I urge you to understand more about the water infrastructure that underpins your daily life. I have lived in countries where water supply is not something you can take for granted, and it is not necessarily safe, and it is sometimes contaminated, and you do have to drink plastic bottled water to have a safe water supply. And I remember moving to the US, and I lived in Alabama, which is not exactly the place that everybody puts at the top of their list when they move there. More for them, it's a beautiful place. I had a fantastic time, met some amazing people. But I remember walking into the kitchen and turning on the tap and being so appreciative and grateful that this beautiful water came out. I could just fill a glass up and drink as much as I wanted, and I'd go into the next room and I could come back in and do it again and again and again. And I try and preserve that sense of wonder and appreciation for some of the everyday things, because I think it is easy to walk past things that are frankly life-changing, miraculous in our everyday life. And so that said, there are better ways to do things always coming through, and it is on us, and is part of our duty to the next generation to put those things in place and do things as well as we can, and be agents for positive change. And that includes our friends in the water company. They're just too important for me to leave them alone. So that's before you get me onto things like landfills, man. I mean, that's the other place that we've got lots of really great work to do. We're
100%. So many important problems to solve. The next question is, what do you do apart from work? Because with big problems like this, it can be hard to ever stop thinking about all the problems to solve. But what do you get up to in your spare time?
Well, so it's funny you say this, because actually one of the real pluses of neurodiversity is that you can have very broad interests. So this thing that people think is a bug, which is that you context switch a lot, and I'm easily distracted. I am very easily distracted, and I do have very wide interests. That's not a bug. That's a feature. I'm amazed at people who have no interest outside their professional field. I just can't understand it. People handing me an LLM and letting me crack on with queries and questions and thoughts, and could we try this, and would it work if I put this technology into that space environment, for instance. I'm asking questions like that all the time. So free time, I do a number of things. I have a hobby job, a part-time job. I work for a venture capital fund called Loyal VC, who are extremely nice people. I'm very fond of them. I'm very grateful to them. I've been around the startup, venture capital, innovation ecosystem, particularly here in Sydney, by that point, for about a decade, and had never really found the right place to be part of the venture capital world and bring my skills to bear in that. And was introduced to Loyal VC. Loyal's a very strange and interesting venture capital fund. It's not at all like traditional ones. I always urge people to go and check them out. anyway. I found working with them incredibly educational and instructive. It has completely changed how I think about startups and startup growth. It has completely changed how I think about venture capital investing. Their thesis is considerably different to a traditional VC. They're an evergreen fund. They make very small investments at idea stage, which traditional VCs want de-risked growth stage companies, really. So I do a lot of work for them as a venture partner, and I absolutely love it. I love the team. They're based out of Toronto. They are as nice as you'd expect Canadians to be, and they are as smart as you'd expect Canadian venture capitalists to be. They're very smart people. And as a result, I get to work with the teams that the venture capital fund has invested in worldwide. So I get to work with founders in the Americas, North and South and Central. I get to work with teams in the UK. I personally have invested into a couple of the teams. As it happens, they both happen to have been from the UK, just because I've really liked the teams. I've wanted to be part of it, and they've asked me to. I'm on the board of advisors for several startups as a sweat equity advisor. I've done that for many years. And that's really more a case that usually friends who are doing really interesting work, they'd like me to stay aligned with them over a period of months or years, and they don't want me to do it for free, which is very kind of them. And so I go on the board of advisors, and then I try to help the teams as much as I can. So I was a very active surf lifesaver here at Bondi, and I stopped 2 years ago when our daughter was born, simply to have a little bit more time to spend with the family, take a break. I'd done my long service with Bondi, and so I'm still a member. I'm still a big fan, still a proficient lifesaver. I'm just not showing up to the patrols as much as I used to as patrol captain, but I suspect that will change in the near future, because one, I miss it and I miss the teams, and two, I really liked helping people on the beach, and providing a bit of leadership to a group of people was really very rewarding. And because I suspect very strongly that our little girl will want to be a nipper, and so we'll probably go back into it then. And then for hobbies, I have had a midlife crisis return to Lego during the pandemic. Instead of building puzzles, my wife and I bought some really awesome Lego sets, and we set unofficial speed building records. So we hold the unofficial records, as in we're the only people we know who've built that set under a timer. So we've got some sort of time benchmarks on a couple of sets, which is great. And that's been a lot of fun. And I build some of my own engineering projects. I'm sort of working on that quietly and trying to help various folks start their own companies in certain spaces. And so that's where I mentioned that my return to the topic of dyslexia and neurodiversity in particular has been enabled by firstly looking into how many dyslexic founders we had in our portfolio at Loyal VC. And as a result, that triggered a bunch of question marks in my mind about performance of dyslexic founders and how neurodiverse founders, ADHD and ASD in particular, and how they outperform, or do they outperform neurotypical founders. And there's some interesting evidence around that. And so I have been quietly investigating setting up a venture capital fund specifically to invest in dyslexic founders and into neurodiverse founders. And that's ongoing. So watch this space. And that has also led me to look more thoroughly into early diagnosis of dyslexia, because I think that is one of the things that has been so striking to me in the last, let's say, 5 years since I started that work, has been how common it is to get a late stage diagnosis in life. I meet a lot of people who, if they know at all that they're neurodiverse, they found out really late in comparison to me. And that is not something that I can live with and tolerate. And usually there's a story of some considerable level of trauma. We all have things as we go through, but some of these folks, they've had a really rough time, often directly attributable to how people regard dyslexia and neurodiversity. And I think that's really sad. And I would like to be able to test everybody in the world at scale through a digital platform. And so I'm working with some friends to do exactly that. So we are quietly building that and working on it. And I'm very hopeful the technique works. And we're going through the motions of the next stage, which will be a fundraise to put some money behind it to professionalize the build and get the software through approvals so that it could be a diagnosis test, and off we go. And this is the first public forum that I've actually mentioned that we're doing that work. So, you've got to scoot, Jeremy. So there you go. How's that for a long answer? And then I tried very hard to spend as much time with my little girl as I possibly can. If she's awake, she's the center of my universe, and we try and look after her as much as possible and have a great time with her. She's great fun, and she's pretty hilarious, and she's very cute. And so we like to do all sorts of things that you'd expect, riding scooters and going to the playground. And nerdy dad is trying to encourage space rockets as part of the things she watches on TV. And then finally, I really love exercising and being at the beach. So I try to go to the beach as much as possible. It's part of why I live in Australia. And so usually I try, during the warmer weather in particular, I try to make sure I'm in the water every day, body surfing, catching waves. If it's flat as a pancake, that's great, because I absolutely love snorkeling, and I will go out and try and spot for octopuses and cuttlefish. And I find that ever so interesting. It's like swimming around in a fluid dynamics lab crossed with a biology lab. It's constantly amazing to me that Australians who grow up here may or may not have the same level of appreciation for the animals and the plants and the fish and the waters around them. And I remember very strongly in my first 6 months or 3 months even, walking down the street in Perth and having 2 green parrots fly over my head, which I now know are lorikeets. I'm just thinking to myself, my God, I just saw parrots fly over my head. This is amazing. And I looked around me to see who else was amazed on the way into the office building, and everybody else was just cracking on with their thing. And I just think, yes, I can be more distractible than other people, but if it brings a sense of wonder of these things when they happen, I'll take that. It's a trade-off. There's pros and cons.
Absolutely important to notice those beautiful little things in the world around us.
Yeah.
Now, I'm keen to selfishly ask about productivity from the lens of being a father of a young child, because I'm expecting my first child in 4 weeks. And
Oh, congratulations. Brilliant.
thank you.
Great news.
And I'm wondering about how I'm going to be able to cope, and I'm wondering about what it was like for you from 0 days to 2 years. Whether was it very difficult at the start, or did you find ways to be able to still do all the different things that you do?
My gosh, we could spend a whole podcast on this one, Jeremy. So firstly, congratulations. I think it's a wonderful experience being a parent, and I absolutely love every second of it. Almost always. There's good days and bad days. There's a lot of stress, I think, that comes with being responsible for a newborn in particular, because they can't really tell you what they want. So you are reading the runes a little bit and trying to empathize and understand. And sometimes they're just sad and they just want to cry a bit and have a cuddle. But I just think it's a wonderful experience. I think there's a lot of, always in life, there's a lot of bad news on the TV and in the press and things. And I think it does give you a sense that probably the right natural state for humans is love, and love of someone else, which is a positive and compassionate thing. And I think being a parent really makes that very clear to you. And that's a wonderful experience. And I'm very grateful to my wife for putting up with me and letting me be a dad. And so I think in terms of straight out scheduling and productivity, it is a challenge, it's for sure, because there are just things they need and they take time to do, and you've got to be part of it. But I do think that starting my own company allowed me to have much more time with my little girl than I would have otherwise. And there's a financial hit to that versus being in a corporate role or that kind of thing. Understanding it really forces you to focus in on what's absolutely vital versus what's discretionary and not so important. And there are some things that I do less of. So I do go out less than I used to. I used to go out quite a lot and spend quite a lot of time meeting people and sharing ideas and trying to be at events and things. I'm much more choosy about the events I go to. I have to say I have quit drinking almost entirely, except for special occasions like weddings and things, simply because I didn't really feel like I needed it. I was having a good time at home with the kids, with our daughter, and with my wife. And so I didn't particularly feel like I needed to have a drink at home, especially, and I can take it or leave it. And that has helped, I think, with productivity, just simply because you're not recovering from having too much the night before, which I think is helpful. I have always been, if there is anything that I have learned that people find odd about me, which is absolutely a dyslexia trait, I get this funny kind of counterbalancing act from people, which is they say, "Oh, James, you're super organized," right? That is absolutely not true. I am, however, very aware of how important it is to get everything on the diary, keep it on the diary, and keep the diary up to date. So I spend much more time and effort doing that. And I think it as a result, it's become kind of a continual way of working. And I think digital devices make that much easier than it used to be. And I remember as a kid having a homework diary. And if it wasn't in my homework diary written down, I just didn't do the homework. And it's not because I was trying to be rotten. I'd have this vague notion that I should be doing something, and I might be worried and stressed about it too, right? But as a result, I learned that if it was in there, I didn't need to worry. And I just did the stuff that was on there, and that was fine. And that kind of practice has really helped. Kids do throw a spanner in the works. And so I think one of the things is understanding who is sort of on duty and who is off duty, if that makes sense. So who is going to be the one that if the child is sick and unexpectedly is unable to go to daycare or has to be at home and be looked after, is that going to be me or is that going to be my wife? And as much as possible, knowing if that is your day. What I actually did in the very beginning, after my wife went back from mat leave in particular, was try to make sure that unbreakable meetings, I would schedule them on every other day. So things that I just couldn't change, if at all possible, that I would schedule those on, for instance, odd days as opposed to even days of the month. And I did tell my wife I was doing that. It doesn't always work, but it was pretty helpful. And she's an extremely clever lady, and I think she sort of did the opposite, and that made it a little bit easier, so that if it was a James is sitting and doing work day, well, then it's obvious that I can reschedule that usually, as opposed to James has client meetings and calls he can't break and commitments to people outside. Then I would try and have those on the odd numbered days, and that was helpful. What else? I do think it's worth just cutting yourself a little bit of slack and knowing that there will be times where it will be very difficult and you will be very tired, both you and your partner, and making sure that they understand very strongly that you're going through it together and you're doing as much as you can to try and help them. And yeah, that has worked so far for us. I mean, we'll see in the next phase, which as she goes to school and things, the techniques and approaches have to change. But yeah, being diary driven is, I think, very important. Being a bit more ruthless, because you do actually have a better offer automatically, which is to spend time with your child, and making sure that the things that I'm stopping to do meet that hurdle, which is that she deserves my time, she deserves my attention, she wants to interact with me as her dad. And so if someone's asking for my time or asking me to attend something, it better be worth it, because she's pretty awesome and I love spending time with her. So that I think as a hurdle rate has increased the hurdle, and it's meant I've focused in more on quality, not quantity. And then the last thing I will also say is how grateful I am to my co-founder and how grateful I am to my partner and my family, because I do remember a conversation where Zara did have to stay home with us, and my wife was busy, and she had an unbreakable thing, and it was my turn, and it was one of those days where Zara was going to have to be in the room while I did a call, and she is very interested in what I'm doing, and she wants to see what's happening, and all this kind of stuff. And I said to my co-founder, "Look, I'll do my very best, but I'm going to need you to lead the call because Zara's going to be in the room with me." And I will never forget what he said, which is, if they are the sort of clients that mind that you've got a toddler on the call, I don't want them as a client. And that really stuck with me, and I was very grateful to him for that. And I actually do think that's a huge test. We all learned through the pandemic that people have lives beyond their professional persona and image, and that's true, right? And so cats walking across the screen, babies coming in on calls, all this kind of stuff. There are times where it's obviously not appropriate, but the rest of the time, it's an absolute delight when someone's kids come in. And I think if you're the kind of person that minds that, I don't know, are you really the kind of person I want to make rich, famous, and successful through working with you? I don't know, maybe not. And so we get to choose a little bit. So I think that has been an interesting perspective, but I am very aware and grateful of how lucky I am to have people like that around me. And the fact that my co-founder has been so patient and kind with me on those days where being a dad has had to jump into the way has just redoubled my drive to try and make the company a success and make him a successful, wealthy person. So yeah, makes a big difference. I think perspective changes. The actual amount of hours in the day doesn't change, so you have to allocate them somewhat differently. And yes, you get more cheesy, and I think that's probably a good thing. And it also makes you a little bit more deliberate. So the exploration time, the trying new things, the time spent researching and reading, there have been quite a few in the first year or two. There were quite a lot of nights where I was up to, or instead, and it was my turn. And sometimes I wouldn't necessarily find it that easy to go to sleep. So I did quite a lot of extra reading and thought bubbles and things to follow up, and wrote presentations and things like that during the night for the sort of hour or two while I was trying to get back to sleep. But yeah, and then I think the last thing that it brings to you is just the requirement to look after yourself for an endurance game, not for a sprint. And I wouldn't say that I'm amazing at that, actually, frankly, but I do understand how important it is to prioritize staying healthy, getting some rest. If you've had a disrupted night, getting a nap during the day, if you can. And it has also, frankly, turned me into an advocate for working from home too, that I know everyone is sort of trying to force others back to the office. I feel quite strongly that we are missing out and losing something in that. My work with my clients is pretty much global, has been the whole way through. I do enjoy meeting up with people in the city. I'm a very sociable person. But on the other hand, I'm very aware that there are a lot of people whose family circumstances, their status in disability or their status as a carer, that they can work with me if we work asynchronously or if we work virtually, and we can do extremely good quality work and we can do it much faster. And I get to work with people who otherwise wouldn't necessarily be able to participate in projects and things that I'm doing. And I really appreciate that, because I would rather they were in the game than left on the sideline and not able to play. And I think that the work itself is much better as a result. So yeah, I think having a reasonable level of time working at home so that you can have a disrupted night the night before and then take a half-hour nap at lunchtime once you've eaten your sandwich, that helped me a great deal.
Absolutely. And on that note of taking care of yourself and having rest, we're going to take a quick break. The Focus and Chill podcast is brought to you by Focus Bear, a focus enhancement app for ADHDers. Staying on top of tasks is easier than ever with Focus Bear's new To-Dos feature. Record a voice note describing what you need to do, and Focus Bear's AI will turn it into a structured set of subtasks and automatically prioritize it for you. You can also take a photo of a paper to-do list, and the AI will work its magic. I'd love for you to try it. You can jump onto focusbear.io or just Google Focus Bear and try it out. Let me know what you think. We're back from the break, and James gave me a few other tips as well. Thanks very much. And
Sure.
Keen to hear about what the mornings look like for you. As a very organized person, do you start your day in a clockwork fashion each morning?
No, not at all. A very disorganized person who tries very hard to stay organized in order to get everything done, I think is how I would put it. But mornings, usually we get up and we get the little one up and we get her fed and everyone fed and dressed and ready to go. And usually my wife will take her to daycare on the way to work. And at that point, I try to get down to the beach to either do a sand run, and I try and make sure I fit in at least a 5-minute dip in the water to catch some waves. I love body surfing and diving through waves and things. So I try and do that most days. That's been a lot harder recently with calls with North America and South America, and those tend to happen early. So the window of opportunity, if I am not on it and out the door when they're out the door, or within sort of 5-10 minutes, there really isn't enough time to get down there and do the exercise and get back. And so I do find that the days where I miss that, especially if I miss it for a period of time, then my stress level goes up, my health suffers a little bit, and it's harder to get back and do it again. So I think it's an important practice to preserve. I will say that I've treated myself a little more gently. I don't tend to do it I used to go through the year and through the winter as well. And especially with some of the very bad weather and very high seas and stormy conditions, I am a dad and I have a little one to look after. I can't take the chances on the big waves I used to when I was younger and single. And so I have dialed it back. If the conditions are even the slightest bit not safe, then I'm not going in anymore. And I think that's the right choice for me at this point. When I'm old and grey, maybe I'll feel differently. But yeah, so morning routine, I do try and get down to the beach. I try and get a coffee. I try and look at the sea. I try and get in the water if I possibly can. And then back to the desk, usually before 9 to start work and the morning calls. And then the same thing. The only thing that's really shifted is because I do work with this global venture capital fund, is that there are often late night calls and evening calls. And so that really does take me quite late into the night sometimes. And I try now not to schedule any of those past 10 p.m. So once we put the little one to bed, I'll try and do those after that, so that I can be part of the bedtime routine as well for her, if it's all possible.
And then what time would you normally get to bed after that? I guess it varies if there's a late night call.
Depends. I'm not great at that. I mean, we'll say this as a first time dad, you get really tired. Like really, really tired. I've got some history of partying through the night and going to nightclubs and things and working late on projects and things like that. So I can do it when I need to, but you do have to sustain yourself for that medium-term marathon. And so it is not unusual if I am really, really tired and I've been up early or up late the night before. When she goes to bed, I'll pretty much go to bed 8:39 even, right? Which I would never have done unless I was sick in the past. If I'm not worn out or trying to catch up on rest, then it's not uncommon to be sort of 10, 11, 12 if I've got work to do. I do find the evenings can be, or nighttime I should say, can be easier to find a bit of focus and to sit still. It's quieter, there's less distractions, there's nothing else to go out and do. And so that's good time for me sometimes to sit and get some work done and get on with some of the edge sort of top of funnel thinking. That can be quite good. I will say something I'm working on is improving my sleep quality and not waking up during the night. I think with a newborn, it's easy to get into a pattern of kind of bouncing awake when they squawk or move or something like that, and baby monitor goes off. And so, yeah, that's something I'm going to work on going back to, because it's awfully easy to get up and put that brilliant idea you've had on buzzing around in your head down on paper and do something about it and then go back to bed. That's not great behavior, really. So I'm aware of this, that is not a positive trait, and I'm working on it a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that'll be an issue for me too. I already sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and can imagine it being a challenge, but also good to be able to deal with that constructively, that if you're putting it down on paper, that's probably a good way to approach it rather than pulling out your phone or your laptop and doing it that way.
Yeah, I almost always do it on my phone and laptop. Funny enough, one of the things about being born when I was born is that I had I had an analog childhood and a digital adolescence and an online adulthood. And I think that sort of does neatly encapsulate things. For me, the digital devices are almost always a positive. The quality of my output is much higher. I can capture ideas really quickly. I don't lose notes. I can make voice notes. I can do transcriptions, all sorts of things. I absolutely love these tools. I find them incredibly useful. And I would rather not go back to the days of having a ring binder with bits of paper that maybe the ideas were in, maybe not. I do mix the different media. And I do find sometimes that writing things down by hand helps a great deal. It's funny enough, especially for mind mapping and sketching out, structuring thoughts. I used to have a mind mapping program that I found quite helpful. I haven't really found one that I like as much since, but I will go back to it at the right point. So yeah, I think use whatever tools are best for you, as long as they are in your interest. And I think the critical function I urge everybody on this listening to the podcast to bear in mind is be aware of what works for you. The more you understand about your own preferences and ways of working and what is positive for you and gives you success on your terms, whatever that might be, right? So yes, I do have the ambition to not wake up with a brain buzzing full of ideas during the night and go and get on it because that's exciting. Okay, but it's still quite good fun and I really enjoy it and I catch up on the sleep and later on, then I'm okay with that. It's probably not my best trait and it's something for me to work on, but I'm not going to lose sleep and worry myself about that, because I don't feel like it's causing me major problems or harm. But yeah, use the tools that work for you, use the approaches that work for you. And part of the process is to critically work out what that is. And I think as I've started to learn more about ADHD, I've realized how the techniques that help folks with ADHD are helpful for me, which is why I'm embracing it a bit more and more happy about that. But yeah, I think these tools are there to be used as tools, but they have to be used responsibly and they have to be positive for you. If you find a tool not helpful, ditch it. Find the next best thing, find the right way that works for you, and be aware that evolves over time.
Yeah, 100%. Great advice. We'll wrap up the show here. Just last thing is, where's the best place for people to connect with you if they have something that has a really high bar, knowing that they have to outcompete your daughter?
Yeah, well, that is a high bar. I wouldn't go for that bar, but I will say this, that the more neurodiverse people I get to meet and know, the more I enjoy it. I have to say, I have had some absolutely fascinating interactions with people doing amazing work simply because they're dyslexic and they want to talk to you about their experience with dyslexia and vice versa. And so always happy to engage with interesting people doing interesting stuff. And if I can find a way to help people, I will do my very best to do so. I think that's important. So best place to find me probably actually is LinkedIn. But for goodness sake, put a note with it and tell me why you want to talk to me, so I don't think you're trying to sell me something. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Otherwise, give me an email. The Auras Carbon website is up. We have a new one coming soon, which is very exciting. It will look much nicer, but it does have a contact form, which makes it easy to get in touch with us if you want to talk to us about work stuff, or just drop me an email. And Jeremy can always find me. So, if you think they're good people, Jeremy, they're good people. And
I'll screen them for you.
Yeah, there you go. There's one bit of advice that has really stuck with me, which I will share with your listeners. There's been quite a few bits of advice. I've been very lucky. People have really told me quite a lot of stuff, and I've chosen what I've kept and what I haven't. Some bits are not always helpful, but one of the best ones that I believe in very strongly is that if your motives are good, then networking is a benevolent act, because it lets you get to know what other people are doing and what they need from you or from other people. And I absolutely agree with that, because if I don't know what someone's working on and I don't understand what would help them move forwards, then I may very well bump into someone who would be extremely excited to work with them and would have the unlock that move them through to the next level of what they're doing. If I'm not interested enough in them to find that out, and I'm not open enough to that conversation to have that, then I can't help them. And I think that's a real shame. So I do agree. I think that networking, when done with good intentions and positive outcomes for others in mind, it is a benevolent act. And I urge people to get out there and meet others and figure out how they can help each other and be good humans.
Excellent. Let's all do that. We'll wrap the show with that. Thanks, James. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Focus and Chill podcast. To listen to other episodes, jump onto podcast.focusbear.io. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or you know someone who'd be a good fit, email us at team@focusbear.io. Otherwise, stay focused, stay chilled, and peace out.